Madam President, again, today, in addition to the representative of the European Union, we see in the list of speakers representatives of the EU countries, Finland, Poland, and Estonia, who are obviously called upon to make an invaluable contribution to today's discussion. We only believe that this mission is impossible for them. As we have seen more than once, they are not able to bring any added value to the discussion. For some reason, we do not see a queue from EU countries in a hurry to sign up for a meeting on Ukraine organized on our initiative. Madam President, we have seen time and again that by convening meetings like today's, our Western colleagues are pursuing the only goal: to artificially keep the Ukrainian issue afloat in the Security Council, thus demonstrating to the public support for their rapidly bankrupt anti-Russian project in Ukraine. If they really wanted to focus on the problems posed by the Ukraine crisis, their speeches would have been structured differently and would have contained at least some truth about what is happening and not just a hackneyed set of accusations against Russia. And there are indeed many such problems. The main one, the continued supply of weapons, equipment, mercenaries, and intelligence to the Kyiv regime, will be touched upon during a separate meeting on October 31st. It is difficult to say what motivates our Western colleagues to a greater extent here. Banal greed because they earn billions of dollars from military operations in Ukraine, or their unwillingness to admit their mistakes, including those made at the stage when they were still modeling the Ukrainian crisis. Another set of problems can be summarized by the far-sighted statement of Polish President Andrzej Duda, that Ukraine, like a drowned man, is dragging those who help it to the bottom. And the point is not even that Europe is rapidly wasting its economic and political weight and is increasingly turning into a dwarf. This is an intra-European problem caused by the deliberate, erroneous choice of the European elites in favor of confrontation rather than cooperation with Russia. The problem is that the overdue Ukrainian president, who is suffering an obvious defeat on the battlefield, is now openly betting exclusively on drawing NATO into a direct, rather than indirect, conflict with a nuclear power. At the same time, he did not shun outright blackmail. A clear manifestation of this last week was Volodymyr Zelensky's announcement of his latest, pseudo-peaceful so-called victory plan, the essence of which is to force the West to enter into a direct military confrontation with Russia, fraught, as we all understand, with a global conflict. We have repeatedly said that the presumptuous head of the Kiev clique has nothing to lose, and in his desire to retain power at any cost, he is ready to plunge the whole world into the abyss of a nuclear apocalypse. This is his Plan B, which he is now trying to pass off as a victory plan. As many sensible Western politicians and experts state with disappointment, this simple idea in the new idea of Zelensky lacks a strategic component that would allow NATO and Ukraine to turn the tide of hostilities in their favor. This is not surprising because such a tool does not exist, and the complete collapse of the armed forces of Ukraine on the battlefield is only a matter of time. And the leader of the Kiev regime is devoid of any leadership talent in principle, and his Kursk adventure demonstrated this in the most obvious way. It also demonstrated Volodymyr Zelensky's readiness to sacrifice Ukraine and the lives of Ukrainians without hesitation for the sake of Western geopolitical interests, which he unequivocally interprets as inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia on the battlefield. At the same time, he promotes an open and undisguised betrayal of the national interests of his country in the so-called peace plan. He openly declares his readiness to sell off the remnants of Ukraine's natural resources, which, by the way, requires a referendum according to the Ukrainian constitution, and use its citizens in the future to protect the security of Europe instead of American troops. But what is missing in the new film script authored by Volodymyr Zelensky is not even a hint of a willingness to look for ways to achieve a genuine and long-term peaceful settlement of the conflict. He remains convinced, as with his previous stillborn initiatives, that the West must work out an ultimatum plan with him and then impose it on Russia. It is difficult to say what explains such a calculation, except for the regular use of potent drugs. Kiev clearly no longer has to count on a better formula than the proposals of the President of Russia voiced in June, and this possibility was, in fact, crossed out with the beginning of the attack of the armed forces of Ukraine on the Kursk region. Hence, the only trump card left for the Kyiv leader is provoking a direct clash between Russia and NATO. In the notorious pseudo-peace plan, this plan is primarily embodied in the form of another demand for Ukraine's admission to NATO. So that no one has any illusions, I want to immediately confirm that Ukraine's membership in any territorial form in the North Atlantic Alliance is absolutely unacceptable for Russia and cannot be part of any peace plans and mediation initiatives. We have developed and are ready to further develop good neighborly relations with neutral, non-aligned Ukraine, as it was enshrined in its constitution and spelled out in our bilateral treaties. However, this cornerstone provision for Ukraine's security was gradually abolished after the anti-constitutional coup inspired by the United States and its allies in 2014, which cemented the course of sliding this country into the abyss of crisis, lawlessness, extreme nationalism, and civil war. Madam President, the closest attention of the members of the Council deserves not even the next Zelensky plan itself, in which, apart from the points I mentioned, there is nothing but calls to help financially, but the statements of the Kyiv leader that accompanied the presentation of this opus in Europe. On October 17th, the head of the Kyiv regime, in particular, in the spirit of an inveterate blackmailer, announced his intention to create nuclear weapons if his country was not taken into NATO. Thus, modern Ukraine has in fact publicly declared its intention to violate its obligations under the NPT, the Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement with the IAEA and its additional protocol. In other words, we are talking about an open statement by a non-nuclear state party to the NPT about its intention to violate Article 2 of the treaty, which could result in a serious international crisis in the field of nuclear non-proliferation. We are convinced that all members of the Security Council and the entire international community should condemn these irresponsible statements in the strongest possible terms. So far, there has been no public reaction from the United States and its allies to this obvious challenge to the non-proliferation regime, which only confirms their connivance with any adventures and crimes of the Kyiv regime. Instead, they were carried away by replicating all sorts of Iranian, Chinese, and Korean horror stories, each new of which sounds even more ridiculous than the previous ones. This whole situation around the nuclear blackmail of the head of the Kyiv regime, who has lost legitimacy, once again convinces us that the decision of the leadership of the Russian Federation to start a special military operation, made, by the way, including after similar nuclear threats from the Ukrainian leadership, was the only right one. Without the demilitarization, denazification of Ukraine, and ensuring the observance of human rights and freedoms in relation to all its citizens, the threat to the security of our country cannot be eliminated. Madam President, in conclusion, I would like to touch upon another important topic related to the observance of human rights and civil liberties in Ukraine. As you know, our Western colleagues like to present the Kyiv regime and its leader as almost the guardian of democracy and an example for the entire region. At the same time, the harshest dictatorship established in the country, which resulted in the delegitimization of state institutions, thousands of political prisoners, the ban on the Russian language and Russian identity in violation of the country's constitution and the basic norms of international law, as well as the persecution of the canonical Orthodox Church, the Western curators of Ukraine, of course, are trying not to notice. With such selective blindness, it is unlikely that they will say a word about the outrageous seizure of the Archangel Michael Cathedral, which took place last week in Cherkasy, which violates the basic norms of morality established by any religion. We warned that after Ukraine adopted a law that contradicts the norms of international law and the UN Charter, aimed at banning the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church, raider seizures of churches and the use of violence against parishioners will be a matter of time. And so it happened. On October 17th, the Bandera followers committed another serious crime. More than 100 militants in camouflage and balaclavas forcibly broke into the church, opened fire on civilians, used pepper spray, and expelled believers from the service. Hundreds of videos of this bandit sortie can be found on the internet. After that, they began looting. They looted the accounting department, stealing the funds that parishioners collected for the restoration of the cathedral, took out equipment, icons, church books, and even stole food. The police were present, but did not intervene in the situation. As a result of the actions of the attackers, the bishop of the UOC, Metropolitan Theodosius of Cherkasy and Kyiv, received a concussion. The mayor of the city cynically called the incident a voluntary transition of the community under the jurisdiction of the OCU. This is the degree of moral degradation to which Ukrainian society, or rather part of it, has reached. We call on the relevant UN organizations to unequivocally condemn the persecution of Orthodox believers by Kyiv neo-Nazis and the West to stop encouraging Kyiv to commit this barbaric policy. Our Western colleagues should understand that they themselves are responsible for the actions of the regime they have nurtured, and they will not be able to hide these crimes from their public. Thank you for your attention.